All right. So it's 10:01. We're going to get started. Folks, continue to hit that chat box if you're signing in, and continue to sign in and get your DEC numbers in there. Nancy will continue to put that chat in there. All right. Michael Hunter, I see you on there, buddy. I'm the only one who probably can see you, but I appreciate you coming in to start us off today. Mike Hunter, my counterpart. He's with the North Country Regional Ag program up there. He's a field crop specialist for over 20 years in North Country. Worked for Agway prior to that, so he has a lot of experience in the field. And he's kind of been my go-to guy for herbicides. And you've seen him the past couple years. He's been on Corn and Soybean Congress, kind of keeping us updated since we lost Russ Hahn. Mike has been my go-to guy. So he does his own experimentation up in the North Country, very involved in keeping us up on what labels are doing. And so we've called him in today to kind of represent Cornell Weed Science and talk about some of the work he's been doing up in his plots, as well as give some updates on soybean recommendations for New York. So Mike.
Okay.
Buddy.
Thanks, Mike. All right, I'm going to share my screen, see if that works for us here.
There you go.
You got her, huh?
You're good to go.
Okay, sounds good. Let me start over here. All right. So anyway, thanks, Mike, for the update and the introduction here on this. So we're going to get started today. We're going to talk about some soybean weed control updates. We got 4 topics we're going to hit. We're not going to spend a lot of time on any one of these topics, but we are going to give some pretty decent updates that I think that's going to help us as we move forward into 2021 growing season. So we look at some of the topics I want to touch on is common lamb's quarter control. I just want to review some of our common lamb's quarter control that we have, looking primarily at some pre-emergent herbicides that we kind of forget about when we use these, as to what other weeds they control. Talk a couple of minutes on some of these Dicamba updates as we move forward into 2021. And then the big 3 that we have that we really want to look at would be the tall water hemp, the palmer amaranth, and some Marestail. And these are going to be the challenging weed topics that we're going to have to deal with here as we move forward. So we look at this is a pre-emergence lamb's quarter control that we did in Jefferson County in 2020. And we also did the same trial in 2019 in Jefferson County. This was actually part of 2 back-to-back trials that we did. The location here in 2020, I'm going to share the same data or different data from this same trial with some of the Marestail, because it was primarily looking at the resistant Marestail control in this trial. But this was a site in Jefferson County, 2020. So as we move forward looking at tall water hemp, palmer amaranth, and Marestail in soybeans, we're going to see a big shift back to abandoning those single post-emergence applications that we've been accustomed to doing for many, many years with our Roundup Ready soybeans. So we've seen a lot of shift of total post-emergence, not doing as many pre-emergent herbicide applications. Now those 3 weeds that I mentioned are going to force us to go back into using some of these pre's. And with that, these pre-emergent herbicides that we're going to use, that we've used 20 years ago plus, we're starting to use those again and finding that, oh, by the way, we're getting pretty good control of many other annual weeds outside of the big 3 that we're looking at. So common lamb's quarter, and we've talked about this for many years, about how there's some issues and struggles. Every year we get calls, Mike gets calls, I get calls up here in the North Country of every year from growers saying that they're struggling getting some control of common lamb's quarter. Some, post-emergence applications, a lot of times it's with glyphosate. We find that it's too tall. Environmental conditions do it. Not too many years ago, Russ Hahn, one of his last year's doing trials, he did a trial up here on some lamb's quarter control in the North Country. Again, addressing that, the common lamb's quarter control. So this is a trial. It was planted on May 21st this year. Pre-plant burn down application. It was cereal rye and then no-tilled soybeans into this field. The pre-plant burn down was applied on May 14th. The pre-emergent herbicides were applied on May 22nd. The rainfall, we had pretty decent rainfall for our pre-emergent herbicides within the first 10 days after the pre-emergence application was made. We had 0.87 inches of rain. So we look at our treatments that we had in this trial. We had Classic, a group 2 herbicide at 1 ounce, provided excellent control of the common lamb's quarter. We use Sharpen, a group 14 herbicide, and we're going to see more Sharpen, I think, used with Marestail control in particular. Sharpen at 1 ounce, and that's the rate that we're going to use in soybeans. Corn, we're afforded the opportunity to go a higher rate than that, but still pretty good control pre-emergence. And then we use Tricor DF with that tank mix, and Tricor DF is metribuzin. So going back to the old Sencor, 6 ounces brought the control up a little bit. Then we use Trivents at 6 ounces. Trivents is a Valor Classic metribuzin tank mix. That three-way mix provided excellent control. First rate, 0.75 ounces pre-emergence, again provided excellent control of common lamb's quarter. And these are visual control ratings 35 days after treatment. The last one on the chart here today is the Boundary 7.8 EC. That's the dual 2 Magnum plus metribuzin. And so the metribuzin rate there would be the Tricor rate equivalent would be just under 5 ounces with that 2.1 pint rate. So just under 5 ounces. We aren't expecting the group 15, the dual 2 Magnum in there to bring any control of the common lamb's quarter in this situation. So what we're seeing represented with that 94% control would be just, the metribuzin doing the heavy lifting there. So moving on, we had Valor SX, a 2 ounce rate. This is a group 14 herbicide, the flumioxazin. Again, excellent control. We used Valor metribuzin. And again, equal control that we had with just the flumioxazin alone. And then Spartan Charge. So Spartan Charge, you're going to see that again later on. This is one that we've used for the last 2 years in trials here in New York State. It's not a registered product yet in New York State. This is sulfentrazone and carfentrazone. So this Spartan Charge is a premix of Spartan plus AIM herbicide. So we use that. That's a group 14 herbicide. We use that. It would be very similar to Valor. So that's where the comparisons should be. So again, Spartan Charge at the 8.25 ounce rate. We had excellent control. Added some metribuzin to the mix and brought up the control to near perfect. And then you can see the Tricor DF at 5 ounces versus the 10.6 ounce rate in this trial. So we did see our rate response here in this trial in 2020, looking at the lower rate of metribuzin, didn't control it out as much as the 10.6 ounce rate of the Tricor DF. So looking back at 2019, this was a trial planted in Jefferson County as well. It was planted June 7th, a little bit later than the 2020 trial. The pre's were applied on June 9th, and you can see within a week after the pre's were applied, we had plenty of rainfall to activate those pre's. So there was no issue there, 1.37 inches of rainfall. So I just picked out the treatments that were similar or to the same combinations as we had in the 2020 trial. You can see on this list, we had excellent control. We didn't see any of the differences, and I picked out, these were the top ones in the 2019 trial. You can see we had excellent results or control of the common lamb's quarter. These ratings, though, were made at 30 days after treatment versus 35 days after treatment that we did in 2020. So a little bit different protocol there. The other thing you would see different on this comparison would be the Spartan Charge. We used a 6.5 ounce rate in 2019, and then in 2020 we increased that to 8.25 ounces to match it up more with our soil type and organic matter. But even at the 6.5 ounce rate, you could see we had perfect control in that trial. So that was the common lamb's quarter that we saw, the treatments. And again, just reminding us that some of these pre-emergent herbicides, as we go to use them, maybe that's going to help address some of our lamb's quarter issues that we've been dealing with. So moving on, the Dicamba updates for 2021. So those that were familiar or followed the story last year, we had some issues with the Dicamba registrations during the growing season when people wanted to use those products. The products that we had that we were dealing with would have been Fexapan, not on this list today, Extendamax, Ingenia, and Tavium. And in June, there was a cancellation of the Fexapan, Extendamax, and Ingenia. And then after that saga finished its way out, we could finally use those products listed through the end of July, which helped out. This growing season in 2020 allowed us to get those products out, used them, cleaned up our fields, and then we lost the registrations at the end of July. They were re-upped for re-registration in October. These three are the products that we have moving forward right now in 2021 growing season. We have the Extendamax, Ingenia, and Tavium. Tavium is the Dicamba Dual 2 Magnum Premix. So one thing that's not changed is the annual Dicamba training requirements. These are mandatory. So anyone that's applying any of these three products in 2021 has to go through an annual Dicamba training requirement. And you can go these websites. You could just go to any of the company websites, either Bayer, BASF, or Syngenta, and look for their Dicamba training modules. And you can do the online training modules now. They're all posted online, so you can do those because we're going to have probably very limited in-person opportunities here in 2021 to do that. So get those done if you're thinking about using any of those three products. So there was some major label change highlights that you're going to have to pay really close attention to, and this is just four that I'm going to highlight here. There's going to be an approved pH buffering agent, these volatility reduction agents that are going to be used with every application. Now we have cutoff application dates now, where before we didn't have, it was just growth stage cutoffs for us in the past when we were using these products. Now in New York State, we have a cutoff application date of June 30th or a specific growth stage, whichever comes first. So with our Extendamax and our Ingenia, we can apply those up through June 30th, or that's the latest. But then R1 would be our latest growth stage, whichever comes first. And then Tavium, it would be up through the V4 stage, a little bit earlier timing that we would use that product. The other thing that's changed is the increased downwind buffer has been increased. It was originally 110 feet, the downwind buffer. Now it's 240 feet. And then to add to the complexity of it, there's additional buffer requirements in counties with endangered species, and these endangered species would be outlined in the U.S. EPA's bulletin. And there's three counties in New York State that have that fall under that. That would be growers in Genesee County, Onondaga, and Madison County. And there's additional buffer requirements in those counties. And that's going to be something that's going to need to really be addressed because it really puts it out a lot farther. And there's going to be a lot of downwind buffers that are not going to be allowed to be treated here because of the additional requirements. The last thing on the label change would be the 44-ounce rate of Extendamax was removed from the label. So that's what we have there. You'll catch all those in the training updates. So these are the two weeds. We'll talk briefly about that, and then I'll move on to the Marestail. Tall water hemp and Palmer Amaranth. These are the infamous new pigweeds that are now in New York State. Dealing with Palmer Amaranth now in 3 counties in New York State. And tall water hemp is now found in 12 counties in New York State, or at least that's the current tally that we have. We have found some tall water hemp as far as Jefferson County in the North Country. Palmer stayed and been isolated in 3 other counties in Western New York. So hopefully Mike and Josh Putnam keep them down that way and keep it out of the North Country for us. So quick management requirements for these new pigweeds is, and those that were on the Corn Congress that they had here in the North Country, or in Western New York rather, earlier this year. Lynn Sosnowski did a great job talking about the different pigweeds identification. So first line of defense for us is proper identification. We need to detect and take action to prevent new and permanent infestations. Again, we've talked about this many times, that 90% control of our new pigweeds is still not good enough to stop seed spread. we can't rely on a one-pass program for season-long control. And that was a quote from Peter Sikkema from the University of Guelph. Seed bank management is going to be critical, and we also need to use more than one effective site of action in every tank mix. So chemical control of palm or amaranth, we've got a couple of different ways you can approach this. If you're going to plant soybeans that are traded with either Extend Flex, which is going to be available this season, the Enlist or Liberty Link soybeans, these would be some of the programs that you could think about. We need to plant into a clean seed bed. We're going to use a 2-pass sequential herbicide program with these. We're going to start out with a pre. So we're going to use a pre with this, with control of water hemp or palm or amaranth. So you're going to use a group 15, which would be our, the warrants, the outlooks, the duals. We're going to use those as the pre, the group 15s plus metribuzin, or you could use the flumioxazin product plus metribuzin. So that would be our 2 pre options that we would use for the control. Then you're going to come back in post-emergence, and we have to be mindful that we're coming back in and catching it when it's tall, because these weeds can grow so quickly. We have to apply them when they're less than 3 inches tall. So if you're using the Extend trait, you're afforded the opportunity to apply one of our 3 dicamba products, the Extendamax, Ingenia, or Tavium. Tavium has a nice fit with the tall water hemp and the palmer amaranth in this case, because you're putting a group 15 out also a little bit later in the season to help extend that weed control through the end of the season, the pre-emergence application there with that second component of the tank mix. Then you've got the Extend Flex trait, which is gives you the Extendamax, Ingenia, Tavium. It also affords the opportunity for Liberty, and you have to look at the labels to see if they can be tank mixed with those dicambas, and it's going to vary drastically. The other option would be if you had the Enlist soybeans, the E3. We have growers that are planting those this year, and that's going to afford the opportunity to use the Enlist, which is the 2,4-D choline. You can use Enlist Duo, which is the Enlist plus glyphosate, and then you also have an opportunity. They are resistant to glufosinate, so Liberty would be an option on the Enlist soybeans as well. And we may not use Liberty as much, but we're going to start seeing more, I think, Liberty used, or glufosinate used, as we move forward with some of these resistant weeds. And then lastly, we do have, the option, if you were growing just Liberty Link trait soybeans, you would have that option of using Liberty for the post-emergence control. So what would happen if we don't have any of those treated soybeans and we're only planting Roundup Ready or conventional soybeans? We still have some options. Our options are going to remain the same for the pre's. They're going to be identical to using like we had talked about in the last slide. And now for our post-emergence options, we still again have to catch these pigweeds when they're less than 3 inches tall. And what we're going to come back in with is we're going to use Reflex or FlexStar, okay, or we're going to use the Prefix or Warren Ultra with it. And that's probably where I would go. I would go the Prefix or Warren Ultra, because I like to see that the post-emergence, the Reflex or FlexStar would be, it's a group 14. It's the Prefix is mixed with the dual 2 Magnum. Warren Ultra is Reflex plus Warren, another group 15. So again, similar to the Tavium example, where we're putting out this a group 15 post-emergence to again extend our season weed control out farther, so that we can help manage that late flush of pigweeds coming in. And then if needed, our Hail Mary is going to be our late rescue treatment of Cobra. So that's what we're going to use. I don't like using the Reflex, FlexStar, Prefix, or Warren Ultra pre-emergence in a situation. It would be an option, but if you do that, then it takes our post-emergence options, if you needed it, off the table. So again, I like to save that for the post, and then if needed, come back in with Cobra. Okay, so moving on to the mare's tail. Mare's tail is more of it's a lot more widespread throughout the state now, the mare's tail, and we're talking about both glyphosate resistant mare's tail and multiple resistant mare's tail. And when we say multiple resistant mare's tail, we're looking at mare's tail that's resistant to both glyphosate, and there's an extremely high likelihood that we have a lot of group 2 resistant mare's tail, or the ALS chemistries in here in New York State, Western New York, We know we have a lot of suspect cases in the North Country and as far east in New York State as well, where we're seeing a lot of failures where group 2s are no longer controlling the Marestail. So we did, again, this trial here that I'll share some data here in a minute in Jefferson County. And I think we learned quite a bit from that this year. So controlling emerged Marestail prior to planting, that's essential. We can't plant into actively growing Marestail. We just can't do it. So if you're going to try it, you're just opening yourself up to a lot of failures. So we want to have a good burn down. We want to use, if you're not going to use a burn down program for it, to burn those rosettes off, because the Marestail, we can have overwintering Marestail in a no-till situation where those little rosettes start. And then when they start to bolt early in the spring, they get tall, they're a little hard to kill. So we got to get those taken care of early and not try to do them post-emergence after the beans are planted. So we're going to either use intensive tillage prior to planting, or we're going to apply a pre-plant burn down. And then when we do this, it's ideal to, if we're close enough to planting, we're going to apply a residual herbicide with it. Or if you want, you can separate that out and use just the burn down, and then come back a week or 10 days, 14 days later, and then, plant and then do your residual herbicide. Then again, we want to make sure that Marestail is treated when it's 4 inches tall or less. So this resistance Marestail is spreading, like I said, across New York State. And this is the tough one that we have. When we plant conventional or Roundup Ready soybeans and we have Palmer Amaranth or tall water hemp in the field, we still have some post-emergent options available to us with, again, the Reflex or Cobra. We get into resistant and ALS resistant and glyphosate resistant Marestail and Roundup Ready or conventional soybeans. We don't have any effective registered herbicides to use. So with that said, it's ideal if we're dealing with multiple resistant Marestail that we consider planting Extend Flex, Enlist, or Liberty Link soybeans to allow for that effective post-emergent control option if necessary. And there's going to be some cases where, the pre-emergent, we can come down up with a pretty good pre-emergent herbicide program and maybe give us season-long control for it. But if you have to come back in and clean it up, or if we had some dry weather or, a delay in getting that pre-on after application, we could have a breakthrough, and then you won't have any options. So looking at our no-till burn down in soybeans, these would be some programs to consider. Would be using glyphosate with a 2,4-D LVE. So the ester formulation, we keep it at a pint, and keeping it at a pint, it only keeps us out of the field for 7 days prior to planting, so that we don't injure the soybeans. So we only have a 7-day wait period. So if you get up to 2 pints, it extends it out longer, and most growers don't like to do that. So a pint's going to be enough for us with a glyphosate. Also in that tank mix, put in a flumioxazin product, and those products could include Valor XLT, and Vive. And Vive is the Valor Classic and Harmony. Valor XLT is Valor plus Classic. And then Surveil would be another possibility. And Surveil is Valor plus First Rate. Now the First Rate and the Classic and the Harmony, those are the group 2. So if we have multiple resistant Marestail, it's not going to help us there. But again, it's that flumioxazin product in there that we're using. Those were just some examples of premixes with a flumi product in it. We also would like to improve the control with the addition of metribuzin. And we found this year, it's only, again, 1 year, one site, but the metribuzin, shined in the trial. We had excellent results with using the metribuzin. So again, I think going forward, we need to start looking a little bit more of incorporating metribuzin in our pre-emergent programs in soybeans. And so we can use, the metribuzin, or we can use premixes containing the metribuzin plus the flumioxazin, and they would be Trivents, which is flumioxazin, metribuzin, and Classic. And then you've got Panther Pro as another option, and Panther Pro is the Valor Pursuit metribuzin combination. You could also use glyphosate or Liberty plus Sharpen. Sharpen has been a good product for us for the control of, for the burn down of the Marestail. It's a group 14. Also has a short residual to help with the Marestail, some pre-emergence control. But again, it's a shorter residual than, say, the metribuzin would be, or the Valor. Again, works really well with the glyphosate or Liberty. again, throw some metribuzin in with that tank mix to help with that season-long control. You can also use a premix containing the Sharpen. That would be Verdict, which is Sharpen plus Outlook, or Opta would be the Sharpen plus Pursuit. We have growers using both of those as well. So if you want to use the paraquat or the gramoxone, that would be the use of the 2,4-D LVE. Again, keeping it at a pint, and then the metribuzin you can use. I should have mentioned earlier in that other slide, or the other bullet up above rather, is another advantage with Sharpen over the 2,4-D is that if we keep our Sharpen at that 1 ounce rate for the burn down, we use that 1 ounce rate of Sharpen, and then we don't have any planting restrictions. So, that's one plus that some of the growers like, because, I'll tell you, when we start doing these burn downs, we're always waiting for those nice opportune planting windows to get it. Boy, if you have to sit there and wait on the sidelines for 7 days before you can go back into plant, sometimes it really makes people a little jumpy. So again, not having that plant restriction is a nice option to have. So going back, so the gramoxone 2,4-D LVE plus metribuzin is another good option for the burn down. So we look at our trial that we had again. We've gone over, our planting dates, the rainfall, had good rainfall for it. And we used the pre, and then we came back in. The pre was May 22nd, just came back in with post on June 30th. And all that is we came back in with Ingenia to clean everything up in the trial. All the Marestail that we had that were going to control treatments. So we had, again, this was a site that in 2019, we suspected both ALS and glyphosate resistant Marestail in that field. And that's why this site was selected, again, because of that. We have Classic, we used a group 2 pre-emergent rate at 1 ounce. We used, didn't have any good control. That was a swing and a miss. Sharpen, you could see a 1 ounce rate. These are 35 days after application. Excellent control. The Sharpen plus metribuzin, equal control. The Trivents at the 6 ounce rate, again, equal to the Sharpen and the Sharpen Tricor. First rate, similar to the Classic, it's a group 2, 3/4 of an ounce, swing and a miss. Didn't do so well for us. And again, that would indicate that we may have ALS resistant Marestail in that field. And we have the boundary, which again, we're just relying on, in this case, the metribuzin in that mix. So moving on, the Valor 2 ounce rate. The Valor didn't do as well, and neither did the Spartan Charge in this trial. This is the group 14 that we would have expected to do a little bit better on the Marestail. The Valor especially. Spartan Charge, not really. I don't even know if it's got it on the label or suggested to be used for Marestail. But again, it was equal to the Valor in this trial. As far as treatment, not very good this year. Valor plus Tricor, excellent results. And again, Spartan Charge with the Tricor, the metribuzin, bringing a lot to the table for us. And then we didn't get a rate response at either the 5 ounce or the 10.6 ounce rate of the metribuzin. So again, just a few quick pictures. The Valor on the left, quite a bit of Marestail in there. Valor on the right with some metribuzin, clean. Spartan Charge on the left, Spartan Charge plus metribuzin on the right, clean. So then the other thing we did just for demonstration is say what would happen if we tried the Roundup on these. So this is Marestail on the left, sprayed. This is 7 days after treatment in this trial. On the right, 35 days after treatment with just Roundup Power Max. First rate on the left, post-emergence, 7 days after treatment. Looked like we had a little bit of damage. 35 days after treatment, same treatment. Not so good. Then we tried two others. We tried the Reflex and Cobra, again, not labeled for it. We don't expect control. We wouldn't suggest it, wouldn't recommend it. But I've had growers say, well, I could try, you're saying you can use Reflex and Cobra on pigweed. Why can't we use it to control Marestail? So we tried it just to see what would happen. Reflex on the left, 7 days after treatment, and on the right, a little bit close up. Damaged it a little bit. 35 days after treatment, not so good. Cobra, 7 days after treatment. Dinged the beans pretty good. Didn't ding the Marestail as much as it did the beans. 21 days after treatment on the left, 35 days after treatment on the right. Didn't work. Didn't expect it to. So to finish up, we need to start clean. Effective pre-emergent herbicide programs. The nice thing with those is we're not dependent on the herbicide traits. It protects us from early season yield loss due to weed competition, buys time for post-emergence application, reduces weed density for post control. Again, resistance management's not simple. Manage like we already have resistance on the farm. We're going to use 2 or more effective sites of action each time. We're going to rotate crops and traits, and we have to be careful how to best steward these traits as we move forward. I'll open it up to some questions, I think, Mike, if I have time.
Yeah, buddy, you got about a minute here, but there's 3 probably questions here. If you open up that Q&A box.
Okay, so you're going to have me open up a Q&A box. So
oops, I opened it up too much.
Can you open it for me and ask me the question?
I can. I'm going to open it up right now. Johnny Vegas asks, clarify the metribuzin residual a pre-plant or post-plant?
Oh, pre-plant, yeah. So it's pre-emerge, definitely pre-emerge. Yep, if it's cracking, you don't want that. So the other thing with metribuzin, and it's going to go back to the days of Sencor for those of us that have been around long enough to remember the Sencor days, we got to remember planting depth is critical. We got to keep those beans down 1.5 inches deep. So you have to be really careful on planting depth when we use, the metribuzin. So good question, John.
Okay.
I should have clarified
Wayne
that.
Osterhoff has another metribuzin question.
Yep.
Can metribuzin be applied if wheat is planned for the fall?
Metribuzin, I don't know on the label. It would have a shorter one. I'd have to look for it. I can get back to you on Wayne on that.
Okay.
If Danny D was on the call, Danny would tell me. He was the Sencor guy. So.
Okay. All right. Last one here, Josh. Resistance in lamb's quarters has been documented since 1977 by Russ Hahn. Do you suspect any additional resistance in our lamb's quarters populations in New York?
What was that? Additional
lamb's quarters populations, any additional resistance?
Oh, yeah, outside of the trizine resistance. So we have trizine resistant lamb's quarter around the state. I think there's been a lot of finger pointing that people are saying, I've had growers, I've had agribusinesses say, we've got glyphosate resistant lamb's quarter. And again, I think those have all been, tested out that no. It's something that we could try to screen, I think, in the greenhouse. And that was something else I should quick mention is that Lynn Sosnowski at Cornell Agritech in Geneva is spearheading a resistant screening trials for the tall water hemp palmer and Marestail. And so that's going to be excellent information that's going to be provided by Lynn's lab to know a little bit more on our resistance that we have in those species. So again, to answer Josh's questions, I'm not convinced that we have any glyphosate resistant lamb's quarter at all. We've seen really good results because what would happen would be is we could increase the rate of glyphosate and take down the taller lamb's quarter there, which would indicate that we don't have any resistance there. So I think it was a rate response. And then we also had some environmental stuff that was going on. And if you go to the Northern New York Ag Development Program's website, Russ Hahn did a glyphosate did a common lamb's quarter trial in Northern New York. And we had some very tall lamb's quarter, 18 inches tall, and he was taking that down post-emergence with glyphosate in the trial and surprised us how it did. So.
All right. Hey, Dan Kehoe said yes on the metribuzin for the wheat.
There you go.
So we're good to go there. So Mike, hey, I appreciate it, buddy. Great information.
Thank you. And then if anyone has any questions, again, feel free to reach out to me by phone, contact Mike, send me an email if you have any questions down the road. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, hey, we're going to move on and we're going to switch over to talk about wheat for the next hour with our next 2 speakers. But Dennis Pennington. So Dennis may look familiar. He was with us live last year here for Soybean Congress. And Dennis is the wheat specialist for Michigan State. He's been up there. Seems like you did your BS, your master's, you've been there 23 years with extension. So he is a dedicated up there in Michigan. Just as cold up there, I'm sure, right now as it is here, Dennis. But last year, Dennis talked a lot of different research on wheat. And one in particular was the precision planting wheat that he was just starting, working with a group and some machinery from Europe. And I talked to him earlier this year and said, how'd it go? What happened? How did it work? And he's like, I got lots of results. So I said, would you share them? He says, absolutely. So Dennis is going to share what his results were with the precision planted wheat and how it went. So Dennis, go right ahead.
All righty. Good morning, everyone. Mike, is the PowerPoint showing up okay on your screen?
It is. Looks good.
Okay, great. Sometimes I have to swap the presenter display out. So, but anyway, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dennis Pennington. I'm a weed extension specialist with Michigan State University, and here today to share with you some results from a trial that I presented some preliminary data last year, as Mike said, at this program. And we've got enough data in now. We've actually kind of are drawing some conclusions from it. So I thought I'd share that with you. But just to start out with, the reason that we ventured into this project, this precision planting in wheat, is because I had some wheat growers come to me and say, you know, my drill is getting old. It's tired. It needs to be replaced. I need to upgrade my soybean planter. There's some new technology I'd like to put on the soybean planter. What do you think about just selling the drill and getting rid of it, buying some wheat plates and upgrade the soybean planter and plant soybeans and wheat at the same time, or with the same planter, because you can get wheat plates for a soybean planter. So I asked the question, well, what kind of row spacing are you looking at? And he was looking at a 15-inch row spacing. And so the question kind of became, okay, so if we plant wheat on a 15-inch row spacing, what kind of impact is that going to have to yield? And so based on that, we kind of ventured down this road into this precision planting of wheat project. So to kind of set the stage here, the goal is to maximize our wheat yield potential. And to do that, we want to design a canopy structure that maximizes our light interception and radiation use efficiency. And basically what that means is we want to design a canopy that can capture as much light energy as possible and then convert that into biomass and yield in the end that we can harvest, that we can sell the grain off of. So as you think about that, there's a number of things that it's going to impact how well the plant is, or the wheat crop is able to capture light energy and convert it into usable photosynthates, which is then ultimately ends up in grain yield at the end of the season. So there's a lot of components that go into that. And for this particular trial, we're kind of focusing on these first three: the seed placement, the row spacing, and the seeding rates. So let's talk about seed placement first. You know, most of you are probably familiar, and maybe you still have these conventional style drills with the rotating gear that meters seed out and it drops down the seed tube to the ground and is planted. So there's not really much that's precision with this. You can calibrate this to drop the amount of seed you want. And you can get fairly accurate in terms of your seeding rate on a per acre basis. But as far as actually dropping seeds one by one, trying to control the spacing, just really can't happen here. And even if you're planting with an air seeder, it's got the same concept. You got a seed bin up top, you got a metering system on the bottom of it, and it meters the seed down into this air system, which would distribute the air or distribute the seed to each row unit. But it's still not dropping individual seeds. So what we did is we built a planter to do this research with it's a small plot planter. So we plant plots 5 foot wide, and then we were planting them 18 feet long. But this is a monosome row unit system. You may be familiar with them. It uses this plate that spins. It's got vacuum on the backside, and it picks up seed, and you can see that it drops seed individually. So that, you know, the goal is that we can pick up and drop seed and be very consistent in the way we drop our seed. So, you know, in terms of uniform seed placement, our goal is that we want to avoid, you know, where we have skips and doubles. We want uniform depth. We don't want this variability. What we want is something that looks a little bit more like a picket fence type thing, like what we're getting with corn. But the question is, can we do that with wheat? Because with wheat, we're planting much higher populations per acre than what we are with corn. So in terms of our first target is that uniform depth and singulation. We set out to test this. And really what we want to achieve is to achieve uniform placing of the plants within the row. So that means that there's less gaps so that you want to see these seeds placed uniformly spaced apart within the row. We think that by doing that, we might get more uniform number of tillers per plant, and our target is about 4 to 5 tillers per plant. And we think that this more uniform planting may lead to more uniform crop development, more uniform head emergence, more uniform grain fill period, and perhaps lead to things like better head scab control when we apply fungicide for fusarium head blight. So, but the question, are we there yet? And I'll play this video, and this is just a slow-mo version of this plate planter planting, and you can see, like right here, there's a seed that's missing, or so there's going to be a gap there. And as you watch this, I'll play this in slow-mo. As you watch this thing spin, you're going to see some places where it's picking up a couple of seeds and a few where there's no seed on there. Oops, I hit the wrong button. So, you know, as that thing is spinning around, notice like there's a blank right there, and there will be a couple places where you can see a double here and there. So the question, you know, how accurate really is this system yet? Can we really singulate seed? You can see it, the seed dropping down the drop tube here and being planted in the ground. And with this planter, you've got your disc openers here, and then your seed depth gauge wheels are right here, right at the disc openers, which I think this is certainly one advantage that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. So in terms of our objectives, we had 3 kind of key objectives. The first objective was to compare the traditional seed drill versus the precision planter, and doing this on the same row spacing, a 7.5-inch row spacing. So the question is, can this precision planter do a better job of planting? And this is just kind of an illustration of a 2 million seed seeding rate. What we want to avoid is these gaps, and where we have doubles here, what we want is something that's more uniform. If we can plant perfect and have an exactly uniform planting, we would have at a 2 million population, a 7.5-inch row spacing, just a little less than 1/2 inch of spacing between there. So we got to thinking as we're designing this study, well, maybe we need to test a few different populations to see what is the impact of this, because if you're saying, well, can this precision planter drop seeds uniformly, less than 1/2 inch apart? That's asking that planter to do an awful lot. Can it physically do that? And I think the answer is it probably can't do it at this level. And I got some data to support that I'll show you here in just a minute. So this other illustration here is at 1 million seeds per acre, and basically by cutting the population in half, that distance between the seed is doubled. And so the question is, so is the precision planter able to adequately plant and get uniform placement at 0.8 inches apart? And is it result in any better yield benefit compared to the seed drill? So that's the first objective. And then our next objective is looking at row spacing. And I'll cover that a little bit more in detail. We were looking at with the precision planter only. We didn't try to do this with a drill. We didn't try to set up a drill to plant different row spacing, but we did do this with a precision planter. And I'll cover that a little bit more. And that is our second objective. So we planted these trials at 2 locations in Michigan over the 1819 and 1920 wheat crop seasons. It was a split plot design, with the main plots were our seed drill compared to the precision planter. And the seed drill was only on a 7.5-inch row spacing. We didn't try to do any other row spacings, but the precision planter, we did 5, 7.5, 10, and 15-inch row spacings. And then our subplots were different seeding rates. We did 500,000, 1 million, 1.5, and 2 million seeds per acre at these 2 locations over these 2 years. So the first thing that we noticed, we dug some plants right just as they were starting to emerge from the soil surface. And one of the things you'll notice is some variability. This top picture here is from the drilled plots, and the bottom picture here is from the planter. Notice the difference in the way these plants look. They're much more uniform on the bottom in terms of planting depth and emergence. And you can see up here, you got like this one hasn't even emerged yet. This one has been emerged for some time. And so you got just a fair amount of variability. And we noticed that right up front, right away when we started this project. So the question is, what is going to happen, you know, as we continue down the road here? So let's talk a little bit about accuracy. first thing that we're going to look at is the plant-to-plant spacing. So what we did is we went out in the field and we actually measured the distance between these plants. Okay, and in an ideal world, if we had perfect singulation, the distance between this plant and the distance between this plant would be exactly the same, and so on as you went down the row. So we measured that, and what we found, or what I'm reporting here, is a coefficient of variation, or CV. And the more variable it is, the distance between the plants, the higher the variation, the higher the variability. Well, what do you want? You want the lowest coefficient of variation as possible. So comparing the 7.5 precision planter to the 7.5 inch space drill, we did see that the precision planter had lower coefficient of variation, but it was not statistically different. So basically what we found is that in terms of being able to simulate, we're not there yet, and we were not able to achieve accurate or like very good CVs at any of the populations that we're trying to achieve with the precision planter. But depth is another story. This is measured as the seeding depth. So what we did is we measured the distance from the top of the seed to where it was emerged in the soil, and we measured that on all of the different plots that we had, and we did find the amount of variability in the planting depth was considerably lower with the precision planter compared to the drill. In fact, this is almost 40% better depth control with the precision planter compared to the drill. So in terms of singulation, no, I don't think we're there yet, and so I don't know that we need to be trying to singulate wheat seed. But in terms of depth control, having that gauge wheel right at the disc openers had some certain benefit. Tiller management is one of the things that we also looked at in this study. And what we want is we want 4 to 5 first order tillers. The first 4 to 5 are first order tillers, and that's what we want. We don't want any second order tillers because these second order tillers are tillers that form on tillers, and they don't produce their own root system. So they are robbing water and nutrients from the main stem. And then usually the second order tillers are aborted and they don't contribute to yield anyway. So the question is, what is the right seed to seed spacing to optimize our tiller development? And this picture up here shows a plant. This, in fact, this is what would be ideal of what you'd want out in the field right now. You've got your main shoot here. You got your first tiller. So T1 is tiller 1 coming out here. Your second tiller has emerged out here is T2. And then this leaf coming out of the whorl here right now is the third tiller. So right now you got 2 emerged tillers and the third one just coming out. This is the ideal situation to be at in the fall. So you want to try to get your crop planted so that you can achieve this in the fall before we go into winter dormancy. But one thing to notice is seeding rate has a huge impact on tiller development. What you got are individual plants here with their associated tillers. So at high seeding rates, you can see we got a lot less heads per plant compared to low seeding rates where you get the seed spaced out. It can tiller quite a lot more. But the size of the heads on these low seeding rate are much smaller because you got so many more heads that this one root system is trying to support. So the question is, where do we maximize our yield potential? We tracked the tillers per plant over a growing season, beginning in early May through harvest at July 14th. And the precision planter is the blue line and the drill is the orange line. And you can see that the blue line was on top. So the blue line had more tillers. The precision planter had more tillers over the season, but that's not the takeaway. There's a couple of other takeaways that are important here. How many tillers did we say we wanted? Mostly we want 4 to 5, right? Well, both of them had more than that early in the season, and both of them had tiller mortality. And both of them ended at harvest at about the same point, right at about the 5, which was our target of what we wanted to have. But what we want is we would want these lines to be flat. We wanted to produce these 5 tillers at the beginning of the season, maintain them all the way through to the end, because these extra tillers that you got up here above the 5, those things use water and nutrients that are not contributing to yield. Okay, so in terms of tiller management, we got some things to learn here. So one of the things that's important, so I showed the comparison between the precision planter and the drill, but what about population? Population has a significant impact on tiller development. And you can see that we had the highest number of tillers per plant at the low populations, and it decreased as population increased. And we had the lowest number of tillers per plant at the 2 million population. Our optimum at about 4.7 occurred at about 1 million seeds per acre. So keep that in mind as we're moving forward here through some more of these results. So ultimately, the first objective was to compare the precision planter with the drill. And here's kind of the bottom line. This is the yield. This is what we're ultimately wanting to know. Did the precision planter out yield the drill? It did. It was statistically different, but it was only about 4.5 bushels to the acre. So while it was better, it wasn't, and it was statistically significantly better, but is that enough to decide that, you know what, I need to go to a precision planter? One thing to keep in mind, these is a stand per acre. This is not the plant population. This is the number of plants that we counted in the spring after planting. Okay, so notice both of these are below 1 million. So you might want to start thinking about, okay, so how many seeds per acre do I need to put out there if this is the number of plants per acre that I need to get in order to achieve a 100 bushel yield goal? I reported the heads per square foot, the seeds per head, and 1,000 kernel weight. These are the yield components. These three things added together are what make up the yield. There are a little bit of numerical differences between these, but notice they all have A's, so they're not statistically different. So in this precision planter compared to the drill, the yield components really didn't have anything different to contribute. One thing that we did do from the Mason location in 2019 is we collected samples and we submitted them for DON analysis, or vomitoxin. This is caused by Fusarium head blight. And we did notice a significant reduction in the DON by the precision planter of about 1 part per million. So why do you think that might be? Well, what we think is that the precision planter did a better job of getting a more uniform stand, and we had more uniform head emergence, more uniform flowering, because when we were making our fungicide application, we try to choose the point at which half the heads are flowering in the plots. Okay, and then we make our application. Some heads have not flowered yet. Some are already flowered maybe 2 or 3 days ago. We think that we got increased efficacy of our fungicide application because we had a little more uniform stand. This is some data on seeding rates for the precision planter and the drill. And so what it is here is you got yield on the y-axis and you got your population on the x-axis. For each of these charts, the solid line here is the yield response in each of the populations. And then the dashed line is where 99% of the yield was achieved. And so this is this first chart in the upper left is the drill in 2019, the drill in 2020. Then we've got the precision planter in 2019 and the precision planter in 2020. And what is a bit surprising is where that dashed line crosses the x-axis. And in almost in every case, it's below 1 million plants per acre, and the precision planter is even down close to this 500,000 plants per acre. So this is starting to help me understand or figure out that maybe we can back off on our plant populations a little bit. We don't need quite such high populations out there to achieve good yields. So the next part of the research was the row spacing. So this is looking only at the precision planter, not the drill. So 7.5-inch row spacing is our kind of our standard. Almost all the wheat planted in Michigan, and I suspect probably in New York too, is planted on 7.5-inch row spacing. But what if we change that? What if we go more narrow to 5-inch or wider to 10 or 15? We need to answer this 15-inch row spacing question if we want to look at planting soybeans and wheat with the same planter. If we're considering a 15-inch row spacing soybean planter. So one of the things that we talked about was developing a crop canopy. We want a canopy that develops and closes quickly and captures the most sunlight energy. This is just a picture looking down on the 7.5-inch row spacing plot on May 8th. Okay, we used the app called Canopio. It's you can download it on your smartphone. You take this picture. What it does is converts the green pixels in here to white, and then anything else that's not green, it converts to black. And then it does a comparison of white to black pixels. So we had 76% ground cover on May 8th in the 7.5-inch row spacing. This is what it looked like on the 5-inch row spacing, considerably better. So by May 8th, we had 92% ground cover compared to 76% on the 7.5-inch row spacing. This is what the 10-inch row spacing looked like, very similar in terms of ground cover to the 7.5-inch row spacing. And here's the 15. We dropped off a little bit. So we're on May 8th, where we're starting to accumulate some heat in heat units. We got a bunch of light that's hitting that ground and being reflected. Okay, so our canopy is not capturing all the light. This is what it looked like a month later. Okay, so the 7.5-inch, 5-inch, and 10-inch row spacing all at 97 and 98%. But look at the 15-inch row spacing. We're still only at 77% here. So as you might expect, I think we're going to see the yield on the 15-inch row spacing be considerably lower than these others. So this leads me into our yield data. So this chart here shows the yield for the 5-inch, 7.5, 10, and 15-inch row spacings. And remember, our 7.5 is kind of our control or our check. We had 102 bushel yield on that across all the populations over both years. And as you go to a wider row spacing, as you see, we go to the 10-inch row spacing, it's about a 4 bushel loss, but it's not statistically different. They both have B's here associated with them. But when you go to 15-inch row spacing, it drops off considerably. In fact, it's 17 bushels lower than our control, and it is statistically different. So I think if we want to use a soybean planter to plant our wheat, we can do it if we can plant soybeans on 10-inch row spacing, but we are going to hurt our yield potential considerably if we go to 15-inch row spacing. But if you look at going the other direction, you go to 5-inch row spacing, you're going to gain 10 bushel yield. That's pretty significant. So as you're thinking about, what you want to do for equipment, investments in equipment, the narrower row spacing will improve the yield. But we have more research that we're doing, and I'll share a little bit of that here in a minute here, or a couple of minutes. In terms of populations, this is kind of a typical response that we would see. As the populations increase, our yield increases until we reach a plateau here at 1.5 million. And then it dropped off just a little bit. But these top three all have A's. They're not statistically different from each other. So above 1 million seeds per acre, we did not really see a significant advantage to yield. 500,000 seeds per acre just wasn't enough. And that did hurt us on yield. But somewhere in that 1 to 1.5 million seeds per acre may be our target. And when we're planting late, we have guys planting up to 2.4 million seeds per acre here in Michigan. So in terms of next steps, that's one of the things that this research has done, is told us that we need to look at some planting date and seeding rate data. So we started another trial in 2020 where we had 5 different seeding rates from 0.8 million seeds to the acre all the way up to 2.4. And we started planting. We tried to go on 2-week increments from September, mid-September, all the way through mid-November. And these are the yield response there. If you look at the response, it's kind of a quadratic curve response here. And this is the Julian date. So the 260th day of the year is September 19th. And then as you get later in the season, this represents November 6th. So yeah, yield potential does decrease the later in the season that you plant. We need more years of data to really kind of quantify this, and then to be able to make recommendations about what our seeding rates really should be. The other thing that we wanted to do, we've looked at the drill, we've looked at the precision planters, we looked at this horse planter, which is came from Germany. This uses a different system for singulating. This uses centrifugal force, not vacuum, but the concept is the same as this, where it's trying to pick up seeds and drop them. Each of these systems have their own benefits and challenges, but one of the things that we had growers telling us that they wanted to do quite a bit more is this option D down here, broadcast incorporation. we have some tillage tools that are actually really pretty good at controlling the depth of tillage, like this Degelman high-speed disc here. So what we did is we've implemented some additional trials starting this fall. We ramped these up from small scale to actually more using farmers equipment on farmers fields. So in this particular field here, and this was planted in fall of 20, we broadcast seed out here in front of this tractor, and then he is incorporating them, and I'll play this video. So as he's incorporating here, the next tractor is planting. This is tilled ground here that he's planting with a 1790 air seeder in here. So we can compare the two methods of planting. And we also notice here, this is on tilled ground. We have some untilled ground or no-till over here on the right, where we ran this planter across as well. So that we can compare no-till versus conventional till, and then the broadcast incorporation. And we've got some different types of equipment. We've got a 1590 no-till drill that we're trying. We have one farm that has this Pottinger air seeder on a 5-inch row spacing. This might be new to you. There's not a lot of these in North America right now, but it's just an air seeder, just like the John Deere 1790 air seeder. It's got the seed bin up here. It meters it out. It's got an air distribution system. It distributes it to each row unit. This particular one does have some finished tillage that occurs up in the front here. So it prepares a really nice seed bed for these row units to plant into. We'll see how this does. So in terms of take-home messages here, we think that improved seed placement can occur, particularly controlling seeding depth with the precision planting technology. Narrow row spacing can lead to increased yield potential. And then we have the potential to reduce our seeding rates. And we got more research going on in this area to see how far can we reduce them? How do we make recommendations? As we get later in the season, we know that our yield decreases. Can we increase populations to offset some of that? And then we're trying to look at ways to optimize planter configurations versus investing in new planting technology to plant multiple crops. And then we're also looking at the high speed planting technology, or maybe it's kind of low tech, I guess, where we're broadcasting seed on the ground and incorporating. The benefit is that with a 40-foot tillage tool, you get somebody out there broadcast seed in front of you, you can incorporate and you can plant a lot of acres of wheat in a hurry. So if that allows you to get planted earlier in the season, are there benefits there where you're not controlling your seeding depth, but there might be benefits to being able to get planted a little bit more earlier in the season. And to wrap up here, I just wanted to invite you, the Michigan Wheat Program and MSU Extension, we have these Wheat Wisdom webinar series. They are going to run on Wednesdays from 8 to 9:30, so about an hour and a half in the morning. They start next week on February 17th. We'll run for 6 consecutive weeks to March 24th. And we've got some marketing speaker. We got Phil Needham, who's a guy that's really helped improve crop yields on wheat. He comes from the United Kingdom. We've got Dr. Romulo Lolato out of the Kansas, who's done quite a lot of agronomic research on wheat, gonna share some wisdom with us. We've got Dr. Pete Berry, a crop physiologist from the United Kingdom. They can grow some pretty good wheat in England over there. So I expect to hear some good things from him. We've got Peter Johnson from Ontario, and then I'll wrap things up on March 24th. I'll put a link to this in the chat box or in the Q&A after I'm done talking here to register for this. These events are all completely free, and anybody is welcome to join. So with that, I guess if we got time for questions, Mike, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I have not been following the Q&A box while I've been talking.
Yeah, we have time for one. We're going to have a quick break in between yourself and Dwight here, a couple minutes just to get everybody up. But the one question I saw here was in regards to how is the ideal planting density for each row spacing? Did you do any work on that?
Yeah, so we are still analyzing data on that, and I didn't present any of that because I don't know that we've drawn our conclusions here yet on that. I think because the precision planter isn't able to singulate quite as accurately as what we were hoping it would, that probably the depth control is going to be more important than the physical spacing within a row.
Okay, and the question was, what is the ideal planting depth?
Yeah, ideal planting depth is about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, unless you're extremely dry. If you're extremely dry, go deeper to get down into moisture. I've planted as deep as 4 inches and it will emerge. I've planted in dry soil at 1 inch and had it take longer for emergence compared to the deeper planting in the dry conditions. So 1 inch to 1.5 inches is ideal unless you're really dry.
Okay. All right, Dennis, I think there's one or two more. If you could kind of take a look in the Q&A box, there's a couple quick ones in there.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
We're going to take 4 to 5 minutes here just for a quick break.
Okay.
Get a drink, a bathroom, and we'll head back here at 10 after. And working with Dwight. Is Dwight on his own somewhere?
Yeah, I've got some slides that I'll share for him, and he's going to turn on his microphone and talk. So
okay, sounds good. So we'll come back in 4 minutes with Dwight Bartle.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Dennis. Great talk. Right. Dwight, look at that. There's some good bucks up there, buddy.
Let me share my screen here a second.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So we're, with the second half of day one here. And Dennis has been working with Dwight, and just a little introduction for Dwight and Nancy Bartle out there in Michigan, in the thumb of Michigan. Understand from some of his bios that he's an ex-dairyman. Stopped out about 10 years ago, and now is focusing mainly on field crops, including sugar beets. And I've known Dwight's name for a couple years. It's the first time I've seen him, but I've known his name from the National Wheat Contest. Puts up some incredible numbers and does it pretty consistently. And I saw this year, Dwight, to see Nancy beat you?
Yeah.
I thought she beat you by 7 bushels this year. Interesting. Maybe we'll hear the story behind that. But so Dwight's here really to tell us, how does he put these 140 numbers up there in Michigan, which is pretty much same latitude as us, straight across from us, and hoping he's going to reveal some of his secrets to us today. So Dennis, you could help Dwight with some slides, and Dwight, let's hear your story.
Okay, everybody hear me good then?
Yep. I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, like you said, we got rid of the cows 10 years ago, so we concentrate more on the row crops. My wife, Nancy, my dad is 88, still quite active, helping us. A lot of advice coming from him too. We basically have a 4-crop rotation of wheat, corn, sugar beets, soybeans, then back into the wheat, which can be tough in the fall trying to get her in. One of my big things is I think we got to set the crop up, balance the soil. We've been with the same soil consultant. It works on a Brookside Lab program for 35 years. If getting high yields was just, more nitrogen, sulfur, we'd have figured that out a long time ago. Watch your yield monitor. That's something with this wheat contest I think is brought to our attention more. We'll see a 30 bushel fluctuation going across these fields. Why? We got to identify what's going on. If it was, we fertilized the same, it isn't just, nutrition going across there. And it's not what that strip yielded, it's what the field yielded. That's what we got. And I think we can gain a lot of bushels just trying to take the variables out of that. We got to get the wheat planted in the spring. Dennis, put up that picture if you would. In the fall, we got to get the wheat planted in the fall. Yeah, Dennis, can you put up that next slide? Yeah. It's all about accumulating heat units. This field here wasn't planted under ideal conditions, but you know what? We still got to get the field planted. Is he going to get these phenomenal yields? Maybe not, but you still got to get the field planted. You got to do the best you can. As I'm planting, I just soon plant a little bit too deep than not deep enough if I'm going to air. October 1st is what we think about planting wheat. A week early is great. A week late, we're still in that window. We have to harvest the soybeans first. So 1.8 million seeds is what we shoot for. We've tried planting less population. I think we're done playing. I need good, healthy head count. And if I got too many, I can deal with that easier than I can deal with not enough. This last year, I still didn't think I had a high enough head count. Yeah. we put on 1,000, 1,200 pounds of chicken manure pellets, mainly for the soil health, feed the soil. We're trying to, we might get a little kick out of the organic nitrogen late in the wheat maturity, but our main focus is get a good, healthy biological system going. Talking like a dairy farmer, the dairy farmer, you always had the cow manure and the plowing up the hay fields. Well, that's still in our mindset, I think. A dairy farmer hates to buy chicken manure, let me tell you. We don't put on a ton, 2 tons. It just leaves too many variables that we can't control in the spring. So we're doing it more for a soil health type of thing. Usually we'll work our fields with a vertical tillage in the fall to help incorporate, that chicken manure, but also we're trying to break up the hard pan left from the combine, left from the sprayer, try to stir up some of that soybean trash that we got. They tell us we got to do a better job with the combine. That is so easy to do in the classroom versus out there in the real world. By working it once, I think we're taking some stress off that drill. Give me another picture there, Dennis. Wheat doesn't like too much water. We got, Dennis, could you give me another picture there? There you go, very good. Okay, this might not have winter kill, but we're sure gonna lose yield on it. Wheat being a fall crop, I think it's very much more water sensitive. We got to do, we have a land leveler. We try to clean up some of them spots. We got another picture here of some drainage issues that, if the guy just would have put a V-ditcher into that field, he could have cleaned up 95% of that water. Most of our land is tile drained. We still want to watch the water management, get that water off the field. My spring, what we do, we'll go in there with a Tech Mag and a copper treatment, trying to get a healthy crop from the copper, give it a little bit of a fungicide treatment, trying to get a kick out of the micronutrients. We're going to go in there with our urea and ammonium sulfate. We do that as the wheat is coming out of the vegetation stage into the elongation stage. We think by putting on this nitrogen late, maybe we're going to help eliminate some of those immature tillers. Lodging, put it on late. We've felt that we've got our lodging under control. We really haven't had a major problem with lodging, and that's a little bit, find the variety that works for you. And putting on this nitrogen a little bit late, I think helps. We, of course, we are protecting the flag leaf, protecting the blossom with a fungicide. We actually tried a biological on the flag leaf this year and had good luck with it. We had a low disease pressure year this year, but we're gonna have to try it again. I don't know if we got a yield bump, but we had good, clean wheat because of it. Yeah, whatever. To get high yields, it's got to be sustainable, it's got to be feasible, and it's got to be practical. It's no good pushing these high yields and the wheat is down with lodging, or the leaf or the flag leaf is green and just makes combining miserable. I think we got to find a system that we can do all our acres with, and not just a test strip here and there. that's what we've been trying to do. We check out these varieties all the time. That's why we had a couple of different entries into the wheat contest. We was trying out a couple varieties and we sort them through pretty darn good. If guys are getting that 90 bushel wheat, don't try to get that 140 bushel wheat next year. Try to get the 110 bushel. Move up the ladder and try to average that 110. Then move yourself up a little bit. Experiment a little bit with the varieties, different techniques. That's the last thing. I just soon lose 20 bushel and be able to combine and enjoy myself than to have a disaster looking in front of me. I grow too many acres, to have that happen. So that's what we do. We're not huge on the nitrogen push. I think to get to that next level, I think we got to step it up a little bit and see where it goes from there. But to get the yields that we are now, we seem to be able to keep the wheat standing up and do a pretty good job, I guess. So that's my story.
So how about we open it up for questions? If you want to ask some questions, please feel free to type them in. I imagine they're wondering kind of what you're doing to get those high yields that you're getting. So let me ask you a couple questions and maybe get things stimulated. So folks, if you want to type some questions in the Q&A, we'll start answering them. Dwight, you mentioned that you don't push nitrogen too far on your farm. How do you manage nitrogen? Do you try to get it on early? Do you do splits? If so, how many? How late do you put nitrogen on? How do you manage nitrogen on your farm?
We try to put all our nitrogen on right at the end of vegetation stage and before elongation. We've worked with the dry form. We have our own spreader. We've tried the 28%, putting it on later. I'm scared to death I'm going to hurt the flag leaf. Yeah, this year 28% is a little bit cheaper. We might go with that a little bit more. We basically are using about the mid 130 range in nitrogen. Our sulfur, we're probably going higher than we have to. We're putting about 45, 48 pounds of sulfur on because of the ammonium sulfate. We actually done some leaf tissue samples last year for the first time. Possibly, maybe we can back off the sulfur just a little bit and increase the nitrogen. Maybe suicidal, try a late treatment of 28%. Because I think we're at the point we like to go to the next level on these yields and just see if we can get those higher yields.
Okay. I'm trying to track the questions in the chat box here.
Yeah, I'm looking in there. One was, how late do you apply nitrogen? And Dwight, you said, before stem elongation. So you're not hitting it right at green up. But a lot of our guys here, they'll hit it right at green up and they'll split it again, before stem elongation, kind of a dual thing. So you're relying, sounds like, on the chicken manure to get you that residual nitrogen at green up and then putting all
No. I think the chicken manure, it's got to be warm to activate that. Hey, this is my opinion, okay? I'm no expert, but my chicken manure, my big thing is when it warms up, that's when that organic nitrogen is going to become available. No, I definitely at 1,000 pounds, I'm not looking at nitrogen at green up to be available from that chicken manure. Nitrogen is important, but I guess I almost starved my wheat just a little bit early on. I'm scared to death at these yields that the wheat's going to go down. So I think at these yields, I think I can keep that wheat standing. Now, if I try to push it another 30 bushel, we're looking at a product to use next year that is supposed to be approved in the next 4 or 5 weeks, they say, to help keep that wheat standing better. And maybe, well, we are going to try that product if at all available. But no, if I'm afraid if I put the nitrogen on early, I'm gonna have a lodging issue.
So that is one of the questions. Do you use a plant growth regulator, or have you used a plant growth regulator in the past? In this field in front of you, is this planted after soybeans? And did you use plant growth regulator on it?
Well, that field there actually is organic. I actually have 100 acres certified organic since 2000. So no, yeah, there's nothing special out there. The field in back but no, I don't use a growth regulator. I do use a product from CPS. They call it Radiant. That's supposed to help stimulate a little better of root growth. We've used that for quite a while. It's not very expensive. But far as something to help that wheat stand up, we've experimented with the extension a couple times. And there's another pretty good wheat farmer in the area that also did it. And we almost felt that it hurt us a little bit in test weight and maybe a couple bushel on yield. So, I'm trying to keep the wheat standing without it. And we've been able to do that so far with variety selection, putting the nitrogen on later. This year we're looking at possibly doing the 28% super late, just before flag leaf or right after flag leaf. But, you're really working on the weather, and, we farm enough acres, we got things to do. It's got to be practical. And that's what we're trying to raise this wheat in a practical form. We grow 300 acres a week. I ain't got time. But yeah, we want the high yields too. So yeah, whatever.
Dwight, what is, next question, what is your fungicide program? Do you do 2 passes?
Yes, yeah, I'll protect the flag leaf, protect the blossom, but also we're using that copper early in the year. And that sort of is giving me a fungicide treatment also because of the copper.
So what stage are you putting that copper on?
Right at green up. Give me some early growth first, because I want as much of that foliar to hit the crop and not the soil. So, ideally, if we can get that just about row closure would be best, but it's hard to sit around waiting for that too.
Mm-hmm. What do you figure is the ratio of nitrogen and sulfur per bushel for yield? You mentioned some rates that you're applying. Is there any kind of target you're trying to achieve, or?
I changed my mind more than I changed my underwear. We got about 135, 136 pounds of nitrogen last year. We was 48 pounds of sulfur. We went back and we increased the sulfur a little bit more last year than we had in the past. I question if I need that much sulfur, but roughly a pound of nitrogen for a pound of bushel. But I want to stress a little bit, it's not just nitrogen and sulfur. We still need the soil health. We got to have a good, healthy soil underneath. And I think I'm getting a little bit of kick from the microbes and all that kind of thing. You hear about the cover crop people and all that. Well, I'm in that same ball game a little bit. So yeah.
So Mike, we are approaching the 11:30 time frame. There are a few more questions. Would you like us to answer them in the chat box, or do you want to answer a few more, or how do you want to handle things?
I guess let's handle one more question, because the one I'm looking that I had an interest on was starter fertilizer at planting. let's take that last one, then the rest.
No, with my soil consultant, he gives me a fall recommendation. He doesn't know if I'm planting wheat or planting soybeans next year. Balance the soil. So I guess my starter would be my 1,000 pounds of chicken manure. Some of the fields might get 100 pounds of phosphorus, 200 pounds of potash. Some of them might not get nothing if that's what the soil tests call for. So no, I don't put down a starter. It was a soybean crop. Possibly there's a little bit of, little bit of nitrogen from that. I'm sure that chicken manure gives me just a little bit of a kick. But to go in with a starter fertilizer, I don't think it's a 1-year fix. I think we've had a system long enough with this Brookside program. I tweak it. I don't follow him 100%. But yeah, as far as a starter, I don't worry about that.
Okay. Well, Dwight, I appreciate you sharing our wisdom. I know there's a couple other questions in there. If you could, and Dennis can, work together to answer those, be much appreciated. And I may have some other questions from folks later on. And do you mind if I email you some further questions if need be?
Oh yeah, that'd be the best way. I'd have time to think.
Okay, and then we'll share some hunting stories, it looks like. So
I've been lucky.
Well, Dwight, again, I appreciate it. Dennis, thank you for your help, your presentation in helping with Dwight, and fantastic stuff. And we hope to touch base with you in the future. You guys take care.
Okay.
All right. Well, we're almost on time. We're pretty close, Jaime. Jaime Cummings is our final speaker for day one here. And many of you have known Jaime. She worked for Cornell for 8 years in pathology and a couple years as director for IPM and field crop and livestock. And the last couple years, she kind of initiated a statewide survey for soybean cyst nematode. And well, you guys have seen some of these results, but nothing from this last year. And things have really kind of blown wide open, and really thought it was important for Jaime to kind of go through some of this data that from the last 2 years, because she's not with us anymore. She's moved on to an industry position with Syngenta, but I thought it was very important that this data get out there, because we're going to continue it. We're going to move on. We're for another year of surveying, looking around the state. But Jaime, if you could, yeah, I guess, I don't know if this is one last time. I think you have this talk another time here or two in the state, but we're still we're not letting you go yet.
Thanks, Mike. Just a quick confirmation. You see my slide full screen and you can hear me okay?
Yep. And
All
yes.
right. Fantastic. Thank you. All right. Great to be here, guys. And sorry it's via Zoom. I really enjoy the interaction, but we'll go with what we go with. So as Mike already mentioned, we'll be talking about soybean cyst nematode today. Everybody probably already knows this. We've been hammering this home for a few years now. It's definitely the #1 soybean pest in the U.S. It causes over 100 million bushels of yield loss annually in the U.S. alone. Global numbers are much higher. This is the 2017 map of the distribution of SCN here in the U.S. It's a soil-borne nematode. They're really tiny. It gets its name because after mating, the females will do a process called encysting, where they attach to the roots and then they sort of blow up like a balloon full of eggs. And then those cysts, once mature, will burst. More eggs will emerge. The juveniles will then attached to the roots, do the feeding, and the juveniles are actually the ones that are going to be really affecting the plants by reducing yields. Those cysts, just another close-up look at those. These are the females after mating. Each one of those cysts contains about 200 to 250 eggs, which is a lot. And so you can get and imagine how quickly these populations can grow in one single season in your field. I like this infographic here because it really drives home that point of how quickly these populations can get out of control. If we look on the left-hand side, we're starting with basically one cyst, right, full of 200 eggs, and then we go through 3 generations, moving to the right. And 3 generations is not unheard of here in New York. We typically have 2 to 3 generations, depending on the season. And so you can see we can go from 200 eggs up to over 39,000 eggs in one season, and that's just could happen on one plant. So, you know, you can imagine how crazy this can get if left uncontrolled. We get asked a lot, how did it get here? Most people think of this as, you know, a Midwest problem or a Southeast problem. It wasn't supposed to be here in the Northeast. Well, you know, it's a tiny microscopic thing that's very easily moved around. And, you know, anytime you bring in machinery from somewhere else, not only do you have to worry about weed seeds and things like that, but also other microbes like nematodes. People transmit it around field to field locally on boots. And also they're so tiny that they can be moved by both wind, like any erosion event, wind or rain. And then there's also been some studies where they found these cysts on the feet of Canada geese. So, you know, this little guy is mobile, even though it's tiny and it's not very mobile on its own. It does tend to get moved around a lot. So it's no surprise that once it ends up somewhere, it expands rapidly. So this was the map, the distribution map in 2014. The blue counties are all and the red are the known soybean producing counties. And then the red is the distribution of the nematode as of 2014. I already showed you this, the 2017 map. You'll see that New York finally showed up on that map. But as you can also see is that the Northeast region was still kind of blank, which, you know, makes it think like, oh, well, we don't have this here. But we need to correct that train of thought and say it wasn't that we didn't have it here. It was that people weren't regularly testing for it. Because if you see that the map there, it was coming up on our state borders from the north and from the west. And obviously these nematodes know no boundaries. So it was probably here. We just got lucky and found it in one county. And that was in 2016 in Cayuga County in one field. And then, as Mike mentioned, when I came to the New York State IPM program in 2019, we had a project, Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey, sponsored by New York State Department of Ag and Markets, where we got funding to test 25 fields in various counties for SCN, and we found an additional 6 counties. So to just give a little explanation on these maps, green is counties that were tested and that were negative, and then any red counties are counties that were tested and had at least one positive field. So once we saw that in 2019 that we had you know, confirmed a bunch more fields, we decided to go a lot more widespread in 2020. We repeated the Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey with NISDAM, but also received funding from New York Corn and Soybean Growers Association to test an additional 100 fields. So we had 125 fields tested in 2020. And we were using a very experienced, reliable lab to do this. And as you can see, the numbers just blow up exponentially from there. And they're going to continue this again in 2021. And it just wouldn't surprise me at all if you know, in the future, every soybean producing county turns red in the next year or 2. So basically, we can't say that it's not here anymore. We can't ignore it or pretend that this is a Midwest problem. It's here. And the good news is that most of the populations that we identified in the fields that were positive were considered low. You can see at the bottom of the slide there, the sort of rating scale for the intensity of infestations. So most of ours fell below the 500 eggs in the low category. We had a few that were in the moderate category, and then we had a couple that were in the high category, including one that had 20,000 eggs. And that's per cup of soil, just to put that into perspective. That's not 20,000 eggs in the field. That was in 1 cup of soil that was tested from that field. So that's a situation we don't want to see expanding across the state. We want to keep everything in that low to moderate. And why is that? Why do we care? We already discussed that it's the #1 yield robber of soybeans, and it's important to know that eradication is not an option. So it's here and we're never going to entirely get rid of it. It's very long-lived, and it has that, along with that comes a lot of management challenges for our growers. And it's really important to understand that it's a lot cheaper and easier to maintain low populations or even moderate populations than to ignore it and let them get into the high categories and then try to reduce it. In this photo here, it's a little washed out, but I just want to point out that this is in Iowa, where they've been dealing with this pest for much longer than we have. And this is a typical high infestation field and you can see how bad that is. And that's not disease or compounded by any weather conditions. That's just losses caused by this nematode. And let's try not to get to that point. We talked about that it's robbing yields. It's important to know that you can be experiencing 10 to 30% yield losses without any above ground symptoms. It's tricky to identify with when fields are infested, and you might not even know that this is happening. So when we think about low populations, like the majority of the ones that we found, you're probably losing about 5 bushels an acre, and you might not even know it. Or if you do think you notice you're losing it, you might not know why. But that's 10% yield losses, and that's going to add up year after year, right? And then again, that's with no symptoms. Whereas if we move into a field that's got high populations and showing some more severe symptoms, you can be experiencing 50% yield losses, and you'll definitely be noticing that, right? And we don't want to get to that point. So how do you know if you have SCN? Well, of course, as we're talking about here, you got to do a lot of soil testing to get out there and find out, because the above ground symptoms can be very vague or completely absent. This is not one of those things that you can do a drive-by windshield scouting for. Oftentimes the above ground symptoms are going to be vague, might look like nutrient deficiencies or flooding or something. So you want to focus your testing on fields that you might be wondering why they are consistently low yielding for soy, but your corn does great there, or patches of the field that seem to be problematic and you can't figure out why. Fields that have a history of sudden death syndrome in your soybeans, because there's a very tight correlation between this nematode and that fungal disease. And also certain areas of the field that are flooded or often compacted, that's where the nematodes tend to thrive. Testing is definitely very important, but it can be frustrating because you can get some inconsistent results from your testing. And I like this image on the left here, shows how you can, just based on the luck of your sampling, you can either get a 0 egg count by missing that little cluster of cysts, or you can get an egg count of 1,500. And so, it's challenging to find it, especially at these really low populations that we are mostly finding here in New York State. So if you don't know yet that you have SCN in your fields and you're just looking for, to confirm whether it's there or not, you want to focus your sampling on areas where you're most likely to find it, such as your compacted entryways, your low yielding spots, and areas of your field where there's sudden death syndrome. If you've got that disease in your field, you may as well go right to the middle of the worst patch of it, take a soil sample, and that's where you're more likely to find a confirmation of soybean cyst nematode. This just further drives home the variability of this pest in your field. It's just like most of our soil-borne fungal diseases, where you get hot spots in the field. Same thing with this nematode. They tend to start in one area and then move their way out. So based on some pretty intensive grid sampling, I like the image in the upper right corner. It's kind of like a heat map of SCN in this field. So it just goes to show you how sampling can really make a difference in what your results are going to be. I get a lot of questions about, well, can I just dig up the roots and look for it? And yeah, absolutely. If you know what you're looking for, the cysts are definitely smaller than the nodules. So you can see them in the right picture there. They're those tiny little whitish yellow dots. They kind of look like grains of sand. But doing these visual checks can be a little bit more challenging, even though they're free. They're not going to cost you anything, and they're relatively simple to do. Based on the life cycle of the nematode, you have to sort of time when you're looking for them for when you're going to see the cysts, because you're not going to be able to see the juveniles. They're microscopic. You're going to be looking for these cysts, so you're going to want to concentrate those efforts in mid-July or early September. And you need to dig up those plants gently, remove the soil. Don't pull them up. The cysts are easily dislodged. You want to be careful about that. And if you want to get your best look at it, maybe even bring a bucket of water with you to dip and wash the roots off to examine. So once you have confirmed that you have SCN in one or some of your fields, then we want to maybe move away from some of that targeted sampling where we were focusing on problem areas. And then we're going to move into more of the basic general random sampling that you do for your nutrient soil samples. And, taking sort of the typical zigzagging or whatever pattern that you normally go. Depending on the depth that you are doing for your fertility sampling, you may or may not need two separate buckets. For SCN, you want to be in the 8 inches, top 8 inches of the soil profile. You want to take about 15 to 20 cores per each, about 20 acres. And you want to send those off for sampling. And for fields that you know that are positive, you want to test those every 3 years. And it's important that you record and you track those egg numbers. Now, I know that nobody wants one more thing to have to keep track of, but it's really going to help pay off in the long run, because your egg counts is going to be a real driving factor in the management approach that you have to take for each individual field. So we get asked a lot, where do we send our samples? And, there's a lot of labs out there that are available, both private and public. The one lab that we worked with, both 2019 and 2020, we discovered was really worth it for us. They're very reliable, very fast, cost effective, because they're only $25 a sample. This is out of University of Missouri, called SCN Diagnostics. And I think the name of the lab says it all. This is what they do. This is what they focus on. They'll take out-of-state samples, no problem. You just have to fill out a form and include a permit. You send it to them, and within maybe a few days or a week or two, you're going to get your results back, and you're going to get those egg counts that you need. Some labs will just tell you positive or negative, and that's somewhat helpful, but really we want to get egg counts. And also, if you're ever interested, they also do the race type testing. I personally don't think that that's entirely critical for you to find out what race is in your field. But if that was something you were interested in, you could look into that. So what do you do if you get a positive SCN result? Well, we already talked about testing, keep track of your records. And then I want to jump to rotating with crop rotation, So we know that crop rotation can be a very effective tool at managing or reducing SCN populations in a field. A lot of research has shown that just 1 year rotation out of soybeans to corn could reduce your SCN populations by up to 50%. And of course, that's going to depend on your initial population levels. And then, of course, every additional year that you can stay out of soybeans, the SCN population will continue to decline, but it won't decline at that same rate year after year. And in the bottom right-hand side, there I threw in some examples that I think are pretty shocking. So people, crop rotation is a great tool, but it's not going to be perfect because, like I said, we're never going to eradicate this. And this one field was rotated to a non-host grass for 40 years, and they were able to recover viable SCN cysts out of that field in the absence of a host for 40 years later. And then there was another one where they maintained a fallow field weed-free for 8 years, planted soybeans in year 9, and then in year 10, they were seeing economic damage again to the soybeans. So rotation is a great tool, but it's not a silver bullet. And part of that reason is because soybean isn't the only host. So we've got a number of weed species here and other crops that can be host to this. So obviously any of the bean family, so soybeans, dry beans, snap beans, that if those are in your rotations, it's just another susceptible host that you're throwing in there. We also need to keep an eye out some of those weeds, and then some of our cover crops also, are concerning. And so we just want to be careful once you have that, when you're choosing your rotations. You want to look for things like small grains, corn, and alfalfa are good rotation crops. So now let's look at those resistant varieties, and I've got a half smiley, half frowny face here because there's a bit of a mixed emotions about these resistant varieties. And the recommendation is that you both select and plant resistant varieties, but also that you rotate the varieties that you're planting. And the reason for that is just like when you're rotating your modes of action, sites of action, herbicides, we want to try to minimize resistance developing in these populations. And there's a lot of varieties out there available that are labeled as SCN resistant, and they don't even charge any extra for those. So, it sounds wonderful. So, you want to be looking into resistance, buy and plant those varieties on any field that you have SCN. And the way these resistant varieties work is twofold. Not only are you getting higher yields on the resistant varieties because they're, tolerating the damage better, they also actually reduce the reproduction of the nematode in the fields where they're planted. It's the biochemical pathway, the resistance mechanism of these varieties is that it reduces the ability of the nematode to reproduce on their roots. So really what's the catch then? It sounds great. Resistance doesn't cost us anything extra. We're going to get higher yields and it's going to reduce numbers in the field. So why don't we just rely on resistance? Well, we have for many, many, many years, decades now. And just like with some of our herbicide issues and some fungicide issues, you rely on one tool for too long and it's only a matter of time before biology takes over and, finds a way around it. So most of the soybean production regions are seeing more and more resistant nematode populations to all the varieties. And even though there have been since up in the top left side here, a graph showing the number of SCN resistant varieties that were available. This happens to be Iowa, but it's pretty typical for most states and regions. They're releasing new varieties all the time, plenty of them. But the problem is that almost all these varieties have the same source of resistance. So it's like spraying the same herbicide for 20 years. And what are you going to get? So this is just another way to look at that first graph of all those varieties that are released. The gray portion shows the proportion of those varieties released that year that all came with that PI 88788 resistance background. And then only the tiny little proportion there in red are the varieties that were released that had a different source of resistance. So you can see we're just kind of been building this issue here. And everyone's like, well, why don't they just come up with new varieties? Well, most people are probably understanding it takes a lot of time and money to breed new varieties. There's only so many known sources of resistance, and some of them are challenging to work with to incorporate into good agronomic varieties. So there are some on the way. Every company is working on it. This is a very high priority, so stay tuned on that. So next, let's look at the seed treatments, and there's a lot of these available. Biological, chemical, some are specific, some are not specific. This is a list that's about a year old now, but I think it's pretty accurate of all the products that are out there. Some of these, you're familiar with them. Again, they're different active ingredients. But the problem with these seed treatments is that a lot of research has gone into it. They find that they tend to be a little bit variable. And sometimes they reduce the SCN reproduction, sometimes they increase yield, sometimes they do both, sometimes they do neither. So, it's been challenging to, give a straight recommendation on seed treatments, specifically for soybean cyst nematode. We know that they help in certain situations, but we also know that sometimes they don't pay off. So, we do know that the trend is that to get the best return on investment, you want to focus your efforts on these seed treatments in fields that have at least moderately high to high populations. However, combining these seed treatments with resistance varieties is going to help reduce or slow down the breakdown of that SCN resistance in the varieties. So just a couple quick trials. I'm not going to belabor the details of these, but I just want to emphasize what I'm talking about here. This is out of Ontario, University of Guelph. Just a handful of treatments. This is on dry bean, but it's just as applicable to soybeans. We see all the different treatments. Seed treatments against SCN. And what we see is that regardless of the treatment, there was no significant difference in yield among any of the treatments, even in an inoculated field that had high populations of the nematode. This is similar from Michigan State. Again, seed treatments in here, Ilevo versus no seed treatment. And we're looking at SCN reproductive index. And we see here, again, it's just a mixed bag. And this was, I think, 8 different trials. And in some fields, it helped. Some fields it didn't help. And it's a mixed bag, and it's hard to really say here. So I get asked a lot, so should I be using these seed treatments? And I'm going to say that if you're getting your egg counts and they are in the low category, then no, I don't think you need to be looking at seed treatments yet. And that is the vast majority of the fields that we have tested so far in the 2020 map. But there were a couple where I would say, yeah, maybe this is a good opportunity for you to be looking into those seed treatments. So it all depends on your egg counts. So take home message is just, always be testing, and remember that just because you get a negative result in your field doesn't mean you don't have SCN. It could just be the variability of the sample that you took, very low population. You can work with your local extension specialist, your crop consultant, or your whoever you work with to help you identify suspect fields, to help you get those samples and get them tested. There's a great resource, an organization called the SCN Coalition, and it's the scncoalition.com. You can go there. They have all sorts of resources, information for you. A lot of the slides and images that I used in here were from them. And again, get your testing done at a reliable lab that specializes in this. I can't emphasize that enough. If you call a lab and they want more than $25 or $28 a sample, you probably don't need to use them. And if they're not going to offer you egg counts, you don't need to work with them either. So find the one that makes sense for you. I like this quote at the bottom. This is from Dr. Greg Tilka. He is the SCN guru of the United States. He says the economics of testing makes sense. If it's $20 for a 20 core sample of 20 acres, that's only about $1 an acre. And that SCN has a potential to take 1 or more bushels per acre. So that dollar cost is minimal. And that makes sense to put on it. And I did mention sudden death syndrome. And, we want to look for both, because where you have one, you're likely to have the other. So keep an eye on that. And they're both favored by the same conditions. And we also know that sudden death syndrome is really expanding throughout New York State since we first discovered it or confirmed it in 2012. So, just keep an eye out where you see those. And of course, with every pest, disease, insect, weed, integrated pest management is going to be your best approach. We want to always focus our attention on testing, do crop rotations, plant and rotate resistant varieties, and use seed treatments where they're necessary. You put all those together and you're going to have the best chances of reducing your losses to this pest. And with that, I really want to mention and a shout out and thank you to everybody who was involved. This is obviously a big group effort. Again, thanks to New York State Department of Ag and Markets for funding through the Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey. Thanks to New York Corn and Soybean Growers Association for the 100 samples last year and coming up in this year. All the Cornell Cooperative Extension field crop specialists around the state who were out doing all this sampling, and the New York State IPM program for coordinating the surveys, and SCN Diagnostics Lab for just being such a great lab to work with. So thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Jaime. It was a lot. It's 12 o'clock. You did a beautiful job.
It was going fast.
So I didn't see any, I'm looking at the chat box. I don't see any questions for Jaime. This is a new thing for us. Jody and I will continue to take samples here in 21. Out of our 9 counties we work, Genesee was the only one we had not come up with a positive yet. So I think I'll probably focus there. I'll take a couple samples there and do that. If you have a field that you suspect, please contact Jody or I. We have these samples to take to the grant, and let us know if you think there's an area that has been a suspicion you cannot determine what it is, and if you had sudden death syndrome. So those, like Jaime said, those two go together. If you feel you had SDS or have had a positive sudden death syndrome in your soybean field, that's somewhere we need to look. So give Jody or a call, and that's definitely a spot we want to do a soil sample. So with that, I don't see any questions. Jaime, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. This may be the last time we see you at a Congress here on this end of the state. So we'll definitely see you around. You're not going anywhere. You'll still be here in this part of New York.
Yep, I'm around. I'll be there.
So I'm sure we'll bump into each other again. I hope.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, folks, you made it through day 1 of soybean small grain. Some great speakers. A lot of good questions. But it's time to go to lunch. So